Hello and welcome to the How to Get an Analytics Job podcast. And we've got a very special episode. So I feel like we've got kind of a sister brother project in this space. So How to Get the Analytics Job meets How to Ace the Data Science Interview. So there's going to be a ton of overlap. And Nick, I'm so glad you're on because we've had a couple of conversations off air, but this has been fantastic. So Nick, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to nerd out about the whole job hunt, the interview process, and yeah, thanks for having me on, man.
Yeah, so we've kind of morphed over the years, and like we just started out as a podcast. Now we're doing these live streams where people get to see hands-on. Like we've actually got Christina on the back end here. We're going to pull her in a few minutes. You're gonna run her through the gauntlet. You're going to ask her some like actual Facebook, Google, FANG. Actually, it's not FANG anymore. What is it? What's the new acronym?
Honestly, you could call it FANG, but maybe it's manga or Mang, but
Mang.
they don't have the same ring, so we can just keep calling it FANG.
That's true.
But point is, some of these big companies and what they ask in these interviews, we're going to run through some of those.
But before we get into that, so I want you to talk about your book and who you are, just because I know you probably bring in quite a bit of your audience, but if some of my viewers who are new to you.
Yeah, man. So my name is Nick Singh. I'm a career coach. I'm also the author of the best-selling book, Ace the Data Science Interview. So I wrote this book with my buddy, Kevin Huo, who's a ex-Facebook data scientist who went on to be a quant on Wall Street, and he's one of my oldest friends. I myself have worked at Facebook, Google, and Microsoft in a variety of software engineering and data roles. But these days, I'm just all focused on helping other people in their careers in the data world and ace these interviews and get these like top jobs on Wall Street and at FANG. So yeah, that's my background.
So, okay, let's break it down at a high level. Like, what do you need to ace your data science interview?
You need the book. That's what you need. No, man.
It's the one thing you need.
Yeah, it's the one thing you need. No, man. There's so many skills that are tested. Of course, just to get the interview is its whole thing. So let's pretend you already got the interview, though, and we can talk about how to get the interview later. But let's say you got the interview. What do you need? You got to know your probability, your statistics. You got to know SQL. That's a really common first thing that they're going to ask you as a screen. You got to know your coding. That's another common screening thing in the early rounds. You got to have some sense. You got to know a little bit of machine learning, but probably not as much as you think. Because everyone worries, I need to know deep learning or neural nets. And it's like, hey, you know what? Just having a good command around regression, decision trees, that kind of stuff is the bulk of the interview. They're not going to hit you with questions about CNNs and RNNs and deep learning this and that. And then lastly, what you kind of need is this like business product sense that is tested through either product questions or through these open-ended business case studies that actually we're going to run through just a little bit with Christina later in the live. So yeah. So that's kind of what are the main topics in a data science interview.
So yeah, so I've been like, I don't know, trying to digest this problem. Like, what do you need to get an analytics job? And it's funny because we've actually, the last conversation I had with you, I think we whittled it down from 4 pillars to just like maybe 3 points of a triangle. So you need business acumen, you need skills, both soft and hard, which I initially broke into 2 different sub points. And the last one is a personal brand.
Yeah.
So wait, I feel like I want to pause here and kind of break down like what did you mean? Because we almost glossed over it. In order to get the interview, you have to have a decent personal brand.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure, we can talk about that. I definitely want to, I've done a little bit of marketing too, so I definitely want to. I know this might disagree with your pillar concept, and personal brand has worked really well for my career. But I think that that's more of an anomaly. I think that there's tons of people with barely anything on their LinkedIn, with no Medium blogs, still getting these top jobs at FANG and Wall Street, especially Wall Street. They favor these people who are very quiet but very brilliant. that you can't even really look up that easily. I mean, these firms barely even have websites. Some of these really hedge funds are managing billions of dollars, and their website's almost empty.
Okay, I think we're talking past each other here, though, because I don't see personal brand as limited to your LinkedIn. I think how you communicate in an interview.
Yeah.
I think that is a broader umbrella. Because it's like who you are as a professional. Do you have the skill set, and then how do you? I mean, there's a lot of points to it. It's like, are you a bro dude, or are you a Wall Street guy? Are you more like a quiet quant? Like,
definitely communication is very important. Yeah, I agree with there. When I thought brand, I thought more like, oh, like how many LinkedIn followers do you have or anything? And you don't need to do that stuff to get these jobs. It helps, but it's probably not the singular focus. You're probably better off focusing on hard skills there.
Right.
If it's communication, then yes. Communication.
Which I would say your hard skills, the one you develop, that's kind of like one of your brand points is what do you know? What can you do?
Yeah, exactly.
Right. All right. So Christina, her avatar is not on. Christina, are you there? Okay. Oh wait, before we get in, let's acknowledge the chat. So Kelly, tuning in from Columbus, Ohio. Cheyenne. Hey there. Welcome. Larry. And I cannot pronounce that name. Can you?
Debanshu.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. So let's pull Christina in, and let me rearrange this a little bit. All right. So Christina, why don't you intro yourself a little bit, because things have changed. So to give everyone context, you were one of my students in the first analytics minor cohort I ran at Greensboro College.
Yes, correct. So
what are you up to now?
I have since then graduated, and I'm currently in a data science program called DS4A, which stands for Data Science for All. And that program runs until April. So that's what I'm doing right now.
Very cool. Yeah.
Awesome. So actually, you know what? If you want it, we can go into scene in the mock interview right now if you want.
Yeah, let's do it.
I can just pull out and you guys run the show from here.
Yeah. So what's up? So Christina, did you have any other questions for me? I remember there was some other ones, or should we do the mock interview? Because I think
I mean, I did have a couple questions about the first couple of chapters in your book.
Yeah.
Especially when you're talking about cold emailing recruiters and such. So that was I guess a concept I hadn't heard of, just completely cold emailing recruiters. And as I scroll through LinkedIn, all the time, I see some people giving kind of similar advice, but I guess I've seen a lot of people say there's no point in emailing recruiters. They don't I don't want to say they don't care, but some people are saying oh no, you should just try to contact people that are in the space and then they'll direct you to a recruiter. I wanted to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, totally. So for folks watching, right, in the book, Ace of the Data Science Interview, I think chapter, 3 is all about cold emails. Mm-hmm. And for those who don't know, that's where you reach out to someone cold as opposed to a warm introduction. So Christina, you asked a great question, right? I talk about how you should cold email recruiters. I think that this cold emailing strategy works beyond just recruiters. So my last job at a company called Safecraft, I got through cold emailing the CEO because it was a small startup. There's only 19 people at the company. So there was no recruiter. So I just hit up the CEO, and guess what? The CEO is always in their inbox. They're always emailing back and forth, and they appreciate hustle. They're their whole job, a CEO's job at a small company that's going fast is a third hiring, or maybe half their time is spent hiring and recruiting, right? So if you can write a really good email to a busy CEO of a smaller startup, you're probably going to hear back. So I think that cold emailing recruiters does work. I mean, that's how I've gotten interviews at Airbnb, Snapchat, and Cloudflare. But I'm not trying to say that that's the only thing you have to do. Just the principles in that book of how do you write an effective cold email, I think they apply whether you're applying, sending it to a recruiter, hiring manager, or CEO. And I think at different size companies, all of the above work. If it's at a really, really, really huge company, think about your Facebooks or Googles, it's hard to even know which recruiter to email or which recruiter corresponds to what job. But maybe you can actually find the hiring manager for Uber's driver analytics team or Uber Eats analytics team, right? Maybe you can find these hiring managers. So I think the principles in the book just kind of apply overall, and recruiters are good. So even if people say don't email recruiters, I still stand by everything. Yeah, but it's worked for me. It's worked for me and other people. So still email recruiters, but just email everybody. That's the point.
Yeah, that's
point of the chapter.
probably what I'll be doing, just sending a lot of emails.
Yeah.
And then I guess another question I have, so this is kind of more of like, I guess, choosing, who you want to apply to and like what interviews you go to. I recently had somebody kind of tell me like, oh, it's not really good to interview for roles that are in completely different fields. Like they were basically telling me like you should kind of stick to one arena, I guess. Like if you want to do like tech, you should kind of stay in the tech space. If you want to do like healthcare, like kind of stay and apply to healthcare roles versus like, going into an interview and I guess perhaps like they might ask you like, oh, who else are you like interviewing with, or like what other roles are you considering? And then telling them like, oh, I'm considering like, I don't know, some retail place.
Yeah.
Like, would that be a turnoff or
I don't think so. I don't think that's a big deal. I think that would be a big deal if you're a much senior person with years in the retail industry. There will always be a question of like, oh, why are you trying to go from like the e-commerce industry to real estate analytics, or you spent all your career in healthcare. Why are you trying to do e-commerce, right? But I think as a new grad, I have not heard of any such thing like that. And honestly, these data skills, SQL, Tableau, Excel, they're so transferable industry to industry. There's not going to be that much of a stigma like, oh, you're 22, 23, 21, and hey, why are you trying to talk to tech companies and healthcare companies? I don't think there's anything like that. I mean, one strategic thing, though, is if you build a lot of portfolio projects, let's say in the healthcare space, you've done some healthcare data viz, and then you've done some prediction and modeling type projects, and you built up a portfolio of that, maybe your chances are just better at healthcare companies. They're going to respond to your cold email. They're going to call you in for interviews at a higher rate. So maybe that's only one place where it might make sense to focus, but that's just because you might only have time to do one or two portfolio projects. But if you're able to build 2 or 3 really good portfolio projects in like 2 or 3 different sectors, like you should be able to reach out to most companies because, as mentioned, this stuff's so generalizable, and no one's looking for you for domain experience as a fresh hire.
Okay, that's good to know.
Yeah, cool. Anything else, or we can dive into a mock interview?
I think we can jump right in.
Cool. So, for those of you guys watching, right, we're going to be doing a little bit of a mock interview, but also we're going to be taking breaks to just analyze what's a better answer, and we're going to be just deconstructing how we can do better. So in the book, chapter 4 is all about the behavioral interviews that are asked to data scientists and data analysts and ML folks. So we're going to ask the first question that pretty much everyone asks, which is, hey, Christina, tell me about yourself.
Okay. So I'm a recent college grad. I graduated this past May with a degree in mathematics and business analytics. And I added the business analytics my senior year and completely fell in love with analytics. I really enjoyed being able to leverage the skills I learned in my math classes, like problem solving, to apply them to like business problems and real world cases, and just seeing it all come together was just really interesting to me. And currently, I am a fellow for a data science program called DS4A. I decided to join the program to just continue to learn more data science skills and to strengthen the skills I already have. I'm continuing to learn more Python. We're using a lot of pandas. And I decided to join that program because I'm the type of person who just likes to continuously be like learning and to be challenged constantly. And hopefully I'm hoping that I can find a role that will allow me to do the same things and will continue to challenge me along the way.
Perfect. Christina, that was awesome. So what I talk about in the book that you did really well is this structure of past, current, and future, right? So you did really good in lining up, hey, in the past, I studied math, then I added business analytics, I started falling in love. Currently, I'm doing DS for all, learning more, And then my future is finding a role that takes some of these skills and keeps applying them, right? So you did an excellent job kind of connecting it. And I think that's something I've noticed a lot of people mess up on, which is like their story goes all over the place, or maybe they start with what they're currently doing, then they talk about their past, and they talk about the current, and then they talk about the future, what they want, and then they go back, So you did a really good job of delineating that. I think one way to improve your little pitch might be is maybe name drop one or two more specific things you've done. Now, of course, you don't want to read down your whole resume, right? But maybe if you could have just mentioned like, hey, I think so. The specific details you mentioned were more about your coursework, right?
Mhm.
Like you said, you're learning Python in correlation in your DS4A course, and in the past you did business analytics. I think if you could have mentioned, like, I saw you've done some internships, right? You've built some projects. Maybe talking about those kind of things more could have been good. And when I say more, I mean just like one sentence more or two sentences more. I don't mean like go on and on.
Nick, that's
But
exactly why I popped back on.
yeah,
Christina, tell me about your capstone project.
Yeah, I'm always afraid of going into tangents and like going too long.
yeah. No, I think that's true. That's a very real worry. But I think I don't care about what you're learning. I care more about what you're doing, right? So
Okay.
you're telling me that you're learning Python. I'm like, I thought you'd know Python, right? Or maybe already in my head, I'm like, wait, I thought you'd know Python by now. You know what I mean? But if you
Mhm.
told me, hey, I'm using Python to build this really cool project,
Okay.
then it still is a different way of framing like, hey, sure, you're using it and you're learning. Like, so I have no fault in that you're learning, but just basically positioning it as like, I did math and business analytics and here's the courses I've done versus like,
Mhm.
I did math, I did this analytics capstone, it was amazing. That's why I'm continuing to do this correlation one. And that's why I want to do a future in analytics with your company.
Okay.
Can we go into Christina, can you like, let's pretend we can go back in time and
Yeah.
you could have gone into like, here is, so I studied math and I got a degree in analytics or a minor in analytics. Oh, let me tell you about my capstone in analytics. It's the first time I got to work with real data and solve a real business problem. Could you explain it in your own words and then kind of, because I think that this is something that a lot of people struggle with is like, I think that this is a shortfall of just higher education in general. It's like you don't do anything. You don't have any like it's mostly theory.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe that's just it's tough to like scale. Like Shashank actually had a great saying when he came on recently was you don't get paid to solve problems that have already been solved.
Yeah.
So like Christina, you went out into the business world and solved a problem that the president of a fairly large organization did not have the bandwidth or the time or the skill set to solve.
Right.
Yeah. So tell us about that. So I want to just say that bringing that into your story in 2 sentences is good. Definitely, I wouldn't expect like a whole project walkthrough right in your about me. But let's pretend we're done with the about me, and now I ask you like, hey, tell me about a really cool project you've done, or like, what's your proudest project? Because that's another really, really common interview question, right? So I think John David, you teed it up nicely. So let's pretend we fixed this about me. So the next question is like, oh, Christina, tell me about your most impressive project that you've done.
Okay. So in my business analytics cohort, I had the opportunity to work with real data for a fairly large company who had just launched a new product line. And we were tasked with, and by we, I mean me and a team of like 3 other people, because it was like in a class setting. So I was able to get the data from the company, and we did a cost analysis of like about 2,000 rows of data, where we were trying to figure out what was the line of ads that were giving the most return on investment. So we had data from Amazon, from Google, and I believe also Facebook. So we had all their cost data. And then we also were able to work with their marketing team to, kind of analyze the data further because they knew a little bit more about how it was structured in the data set. And we also were meeting directly with the CEO of the company about every couple of weeks to just kind of give him, a heads up on what we were doing and showing him the timeline of, the things we were planning to do later. And then at the very end, we were able to deliver a Tableau dashboard that allowed the CEO to kind of like look at the ad spend and how it was doing and where they should put more money, maybe, dial back on some other channels. And yeah, that was pretty much the first project that I did that involved like a real company's data, where like I worked directly with, different teams within their company. And yeah, it was really exciting.
Cool. So that's a great answer. So there's a lot of stuff to work there. So I think one thing you've done really well, Christina, not just in your last answer to the about me, but here again, is that you're telling your stories in a very structured, linear way that's easy to follow. And I talk about this in the book, and people have heard about this as well. It's called the STAR format, where you try to break in your behavioral interview answer into a structure of STAR: situation, task, action, and result. So situation was, Christina, you were consulting for some person. You were tasked with figuring out what kinds of ads did better. You did some actions. You analyzed 2,000 rows of data. And the result was this: you presented a dashboard, and that let the stakeholder better understand how their ads were doing. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes.
Perfect. You'll be surprised at how many people I can't even tell it back because they don't say their story this way. They start with a result and they say what they did, and they forgot about what the situation was, and they forgot that this is ad data. So I think that one was a really, big kudos to you that I could even understand it. So
wait, can I take a stab at explaining it from Christina's perspective? I'm totally mansplaining right now, which is
sure. Let's hear.
Forgive me, but Christina, you're leaving out key details you're leaving out the thing that I am the most impressed with. So okay, so I'm gonna go into how I would explain it.
Yeah.
All right, so in my capstone course, I had to work on a consulting engagement directly with the president of a manufacturing organization. They had launched a brand new product line, and they were very concerned about how are we going to optimize our marketing budget. So they were advertising on Facebook, Google, and Amazon. Our team was tasked with figuring out which of these three channels had the best return on investment. Now, the data came in really messy, and this was the first time that I ever saw data that it wasn't cleaned up and polished. What I actually had to do was go into the Tableau forums and figure out how to combine these data sources together, because there wasn't a uniformed date hierarchy. So there were just gaps. So not every day did they spend money on ads, and not every day did they have sale. So I figured out this concept called a date scaffold that I used to combine all three of the data sources together.
Perfect. So that was great. And that was actually going to be part of my critique as well, Christina, that I understood the situation. I understood the task. And did you see how when I was trying to explain back your own project, I kind of glossed over the action? I was just like, and I guess you did something, and that made a Tableau dashboard, right? Mm-hmm. So I think, John, you did a great thing of Christina, you're the one who actually did the work, right? So you did a great thing that I didn't pick up on was what was the actual damn action you took.
Right.
And John, you presented that really well because you showed, if I felt invested, like, oh, it was messy. And then you went on the forums and you're looking left and right. You couldn't, and then you found it out. Wow, she's a problem solver. Wow. I personally have not heard of this word called date scaffold. 100% being honest. I don't know what that is. So I'm already like, wow, that seems something interesting. I know about profitability analysis. I've done my own ad campaigns. I've not heard about that, right? So I would ask you questions there. So I think, you glossed over that action part a little too quickly.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that John David, you did right, that I felt was missed here was like, I know maybe for client privileges, you can't mention who the client was, but I just felt like you just said it really vaguely, like there was a company. It's like, you could say it's a manufacturing company that, you could have set it up just a little bit more like, so it feels a little real to me. You know what I mean? Because I get it. You can't say who the manufacturing company was, but there's still something like, oh, they're an energy industrials company that were manufacturing something and, something like that.
Okay, so just like a little more context and
yeah, a little bit more context, but I think it's not like in terms of like time. So your answer was fine, maybe a little on the long side. So I'm not trying to say even more. It was just like you were missing one word, a manufacturing company tasked with ads. Like use those keywords. And I think you wrote optimizing marketing budget. Not you wrote, sorry, you said, John David, optimizing marketing budget. It's like, oh, everyone can understand what that is because everyone in business understands marketing has a big budget. You got to optimize that shit, right? So I think you sort of said that, but just in less words, you could still actually convey more information by using some of these keywords, and you'd have me, someone who's run ads, nodding along like, oh yeah, I've been in that shoes where I've run ads and maybe didn't have it for every date and tried to figure out how are my ads doing across channels, right? That's another keyword you could have used, like across channels like Facebook, Google, and Facebook, and So I think you have a really solid start right there, and then I think on the result, maybe a little bit more besides like I presented it to them. Like what happened? So they, and maybe you don't have a real result, but where you can, so for people in the audience, where you can have a real result and emphasize like, so they turned a campaign off, or they doubled down on Facebook ads, or they cut their budget by 25% because they realized they wasted money, right? Like that still gives me a little bit more context of like, wow, you actually did something. You didn't just present a dashboard, like some action actually came out of it. There was a result in that star format. So,
right. And even in my explanation, I left out the result. It was like, well, we figured out that Amazon was the best return on investment, so we killed the Facebook and Google ads. But I really just wanted to highlight the I think the most impressive thing is that you found yourself in a situation where you didn't know the answer, and instead of just looking for the teacher to like, mama bird the answer into your mouth, you went out to the internet and you figured it and solved it yourself. Because that's a lot of what analysts and Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, data scientists do, is they go out and they find solutions online.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, I think the book is called How to, Ace the Data Science Interview, but data analysts are reading this, ML engineers, right? So, I mean, we wrote it for a bigger audience, just named this way. But yeah, exactly. So I'm familiar with the analytics job hunt as well. And I think, the result was a little bit missed. And I know in your story, when you said it, John David, I think you just stopped before the result on purpose, just to like emphasize the action.
Well, then it's like, what happened? Yeah.
No. And I know in a real answer you're given the R part, but like interestingly enough, Christina, he said that R part of like, hey, and then they stopped the Amazon ad. Like you didn't tell me that.
Yeah.
Right? And
I didn't know that happened.
Oh, okay.
But now I have that, so that next
now you
time
have that. So now there was a real concrete action, because then I'm like, oh shit, like she found something that actually changed the marketing department's allocation. Like that's a real outcome. So sweet. So I think we beat this one to the ground. I think we're good there. Christina, any questions so far about any of this stuff? Otherwise, we can jump into some more technical questions.
I don't think so.
Okay, great. So here's a fun technical question that the hedge fund D.E. Shaw asks. So D.E. Shaw is where Jeff Bezos used to work, I think in '94, before he joined Amazon. So he was a big hotshot VP there, got some money, started up Amazon.com. So D.E. Shaw is still kicking alive, and they're doing really well. They asked some really tough questions on Wall Street. But I think this question is tough, but not like insanely tough. I think it's a really good question that most people who've taken a probability and statistics class should have some reasoning around. Okay. And then the final thing I want to let people know is, guys, I'm going to ask a question. It's more about how you think and how you explain yourself rather than what's your answer. So just keep that in mind. And Christina, that means, verbalize your own thinking, and we're going to give hella partial credit, right? So if you have some ideas, like, because I don't expect you to have the answer, and it actually requires a whiteboard. So without further ado, let's do the question, and then you'll see where we can get some partial credit.
Okay.
So the question is, say you have a coin, okay, and you flip it 1,000 times, and 550 of the times it came up heads. Okay, so 550 heads out of 1,000 coin flips. you know?
Mhm.
So Christina, do you think this coin is biased? Why or why not?
So I would say no. I don't think immediately it would be biased.
Sure.
Just because, I mean, although 1,000 is like a large trial size, I guess. It I guess you can't ever like guarantee that it's going to be 50-50.
Right.
But I think you could maybe conduct like a test using like a p-value with, you can automate that to even more trials and see if it, if it holds on to like that threshold and it's, above or below the p-value, then maybe you could determine if it's actually biased or not. Otherwise, I think just because you got 550 flips, you can't like throw the coin away and say like, oh no, this is a bad coin.
Right. Because of just general random noise, it can be 550. That's in the realm of possibility. Great.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a really good starting answer, right? And I think you've already earned so much partial credit because you've already hit on certain words like, hey, there's always some noise, there's some variation. You might want to conduct a statistical test and see what the p-value is and see, where the null hypothesis is that it's fair, see if you can reject that, see what the confidence interval looks like. So, yeah, that's great. And if you had paper and pencil, you mentioned like a p-test, like, or a p-value, like, what kind of statistical test might you use to, like try to set that up? Maybe we'll solve it somewhere else and we'll have a table to look up some information, but I'm just curious. Okay, given these numbers, I've given you a few numbers, 550 heads, and there's 1,000 coin flips, how would you go about seeing, is this coin biased or not? How would you go about constructing that p-value?
Yeah, so I think like you mentioned, setting up like an interval, like a confidence interval to conduct like a hypothesis test on. You could use the central limit theorem.
Perfect. Yeah.
And it would help you set up that interval and then conduct the test.
Perfect. Yeah. So this is great. And I know we can stop it right here because, with paper and pencil, we could have done the full thing. But you use the keyword central limit theorem. That was great. Another keyword you could have used is z-test. Let's do a z-test. One thing you could have said is, hey, when you flip 1,000 coins, and if it was fair, you would have expected 500 out of 1,000, right? That's like the mean, right? What's the variance look like? So one keyword you could have used would have been Bernoulli random variable, right? Because flipping a coin, it's 50-50 event. It's a Bernoulli random variable. And you could have said, hey, you know what? The formula for variance of this would have been n times p times 1 minus p, right? And by now I'm not trying to say you would actually have said this. These interviews happen on a whiteboard or on paper pencil. So, and an interviewer would have pushed you towards this. So I'm not trying to expect you to be like just sitting there and start saying these formulas. I would have if we kept going, I would have pushed you to that. And what you would have found would have been 1,000 times 0.5 times 0.5. What that looks like is 250. The square root of 250 is 16 something. And you start to realize, wow, if the standard deviation is 16, right? So if you had 516 coin flips, or 584 on the other way, basically 484, basically 500 minus 16. That's like one standard deviation away from the mean, right? But we didn't do 516 coin flips. We did 550. We're 3 standard deviations away from the mean. The chance of that just happening randomly, that's like less than 0.1%, right? So now, of course, this is where better answers can come here, where it's like, hey, sure, maybe you don't have the exact intuition on like, hey, what's the p-score there? But you could have been like, oh, I think, let's see what's the standard deviation. Oh, the standard deviation is 16. And this thing was 50. That's more than 3 standard deviations away. That's pretty rare. If something's 3 standard deviations away from the mean, so maybe the coin is biased, right? So I think that would have been like the full kind of answer. And I know just for this, you crushed it. You gave a good keywords, and at these more quantitative Wall Street jobs, they would actually expect you to run through the math. And that's what we have in the book, a bunch of practice with these kind of questions, because it's hard to, think on your feet like this and do
Yeah.
the math, but, and that's why our book also has all these like different formulas in there, almost like a cheat sheet style. Cause you're going to need to know about, different probability distributions and how to run different tests. So,
Yeah, I think it's definitely helpful to go through going through, the different questions in the book. Cause, I did take, I'm a math major, so I did have to take a lot of mathematics and statistics courses, but it's never really framed in like a business problem sense. Like I've never seen it framed like that. And prior to this, I was studying for actuarial exams.
Sure.
So that was more of like the same statistical concepts, like different distributions in more of a context, but still it wasn't business context. It was more of like an insurance
use case. Yeah. And that's why practice makes perfect, right? Because at the end of the day, I didn't ask you some deep learning question about neural networks. I asked you a question that you learn in, your first or second statistics class about how do you do a z-test or what's a Bernoulli random variable, and that's where practice makes perfect, because it's really easy to mess up on this kind of thing. And I asked a room of Harvard students about a month ago. I asked them the same question. There was about 90 folks, and almost everyone's like, nah, the coin's not biased. Like, this is just what it is. And very few people were like, oh, actually, you know what? Let's conduct a test. And then we started talking about the test, and everyone's like, oh yeah, now that you say it that way, 3 standard deviations, but people don't intuitively just say the word, oh, what's the mean and what's the standard deviation, and how crazy of an event is it? Because it wasn't an accident that I gave you the number 1,000 coin flips, 550, and the mean is 500. I kept these probabilities simple so that people could actually manipulate them, so that you don't just wing it and be like, as if it was 502 or if it was 700, both seem likely. The numbers were there for a reason. But you did great. This is awesome.
Thank you.
Let's ask another question, John. John David, do you have any commentary, or we can get into the next one?
So I swim in the kiddie pool when it comes to mathematics concepts. Like, I am not. I'm very heavy on the business side, and then I bring people like Christina and Nick, like you, in to come do the business stuff. So that's part of the reason why I'm ducking out, so I don't get in the way. I want you guys to just have this technical conversation. Yeah,
this is good though. So this is fun. I can ask you the next question, Christina. So John David, you can go into interview mode. So Christina, another kind of, as we alluded to in the start of the interview, I mentioned, besides these technical questions around prob, stat, ML, SQL coding that are asked, you're also asked like businessy questions, open-ended product or business case type questions. And, again, there's no right or wrong answer. It's more about how you think and how you frame a problem. So, I just want to talk to you today about Uber's, pretend you were interviewing with me and I was at Uber. So this is a real question Uber would ask, which is, what are some of the metrics you think that the Uber should track to measure the success of their surge pricing algorithm? So just so I can repeat it again for the audience, basically at Uber, their surge pricing where the prices just jump up, what metrics should we be tracking to make sure we're operating well, And it's purposely very nebulous as a question, right? Because what does operating well mean? Well, that's part of the conversation we're going to have today. But so that's the framing. So Christina, you can take a few seconds and, start your answer.
Okay. So if we're trying to, I guess, evaluate how well it's, working with the current surge pricing and how it's affecting like drivers and riders as well. So I guess you would have, so the surge pricing, the reason they're doing it is, supply and demand. So the metrics you'd have to track would be, I guess, from both drivers and riders. Sorry, I keep messing up the two. Yeah. So from both drivers and riders, so you'd want to look at metrics like wait times. I know when I recently have tried to take Ubers, it's taking like much longer time to get a driver. And then so wait times would be a good metric to look at. I guess total rides, like how many people are actually taking a ride, and then also like cancellations. Because I know if a wait time is too long, sometimes you just choose to cancel it because you get sick of waiting. So wait times, number of rides, cancellations, I think, as well as like how many drivers are in the area. That would be another metric. And I think other metrics kind of like that would not be as like obvious to like the people who are driving and riding, maybe like COVID rates in the area, because a lot of people, are choosing not to drive because it puts them at risk. So maybe looking at COVID rates, maybe vaccination rates, as well as the mask mandates. Maybe like some counties have certain mask mandates and others, don't. And so people might not be wearing a mask in certain areas. Yeah, I think that's the main metrics I could think of.
Yeah.
Now, yeah.
Cool. So let's pause the interview. So, Christina, I think you framed it really nicely by isolating the fact that there's both drivers and riders as stakeholders, right? Both of these parties matter. And I think one party you forgot about was Uber itself, right? In the sense that, like, yeah, sure, but like there's total rides, there's the wait times. But does Uber get paid in wait times or rides? No, Uber gets paid in money, right? What happened to revenue? What happened to profit?
Mm-hmm.
What happened to surge pricing rates and how much extra revenue Uber brought in during surge pricing times, and then how much extra expenses they might have had, because surging means they also pay drivers a lot more,
Mm-hmm.
right? But maybe it's not equivalent to how much they're bringing in, because
Right.
they don't get all the money when it's surging, right? So I think you forgot about that one main party, which honestly, Uber selfishly says that's the most important party, like, hey,
Yeah.
what about the money, right? It's all about the money, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think that would have been one good one to do. I think it was good but it was really good that you mentioned the word supply and demand, because that's the core of the surge pricing algorithm. Like, why are we doing this? So I think rather than just jumping into metrics, you did a really good job of just giving a little bit more context that shows me you understood the problem, which is like, oh yeah, there's drivers and riders, there's a supply and demand imbalance. Surge pricing is supposed to fix that, and here are the metrics we would track. And at the top line metric would have been like revenue brought in. I think it was good for you to mention some of these more interesting metrics that maybe weren't that important. But I'm not sure if I would have gone the COVID route, because I'm not sure. I think that's relevant to Uber and demand forecasting in general, but not anything specific to surge pricing. I think you could have mentioned some more metrics that relate surge pricing times to non-surge pricing times, like what's the rider cancellation rate in normal times versus surge pricing times, right? Because maybe it's 2x higher when it's surging, prices are 2x higher. Maybe twice the cancellation rate is fine, but what if it was 10 times as much? Then you'd be like, wow, no one's really even taking rides. Probably our surge pricing algorithm is like a little wonky. It's not incentivizing drivers to come in fast enough so the prices remain high, and riders basically hate this, right? Another thing you could have mentioned as like a more ancillary metric, not a main metric, that could have shown that you thought about it a little bit more would have been like something like satisfaction, rider or driver satisfaction, right? Because like we've been there where it's like you hate Uber when it's surging 5x. You're like, what the hell is this app? I'm going to drive Lyft, right? Or I'm going to use Lyft, or I'm going to take the bus or something like that. I think you could have mentioned something about that, this idea of net promoter score, NPS, or customer satisfaction, some element of like, sure, the money is going up or down, but like, how do people actually feel about it? Are drivers retaining on the platform, or are we not incentivizing them as much during surge pricing? And same way, are riders churning out? Are they like basically quitting the app after this and being like, you know what, I'm never going to take Uber again because this surge thing is whack. It's always surging, or the surge is too high. And I don't know, I live in the middle of nowhere and nothing's happening and it's still surging. What the hell's wrong with you guys? Sure, you guys are making money, but I don't want to ride Uber, right? So maybe that's what happens, right? So I think mentioning some of those metrics could have also rounded out your answer a little bit more. because I didn't really find the COVID masking stuff very relevant to task at hand, which is surge pricing.
Okay.
Yeah. So, but overall, I think you still did a really, really good job on the answer. So I'll support it. Cool. John David, do you have any ideas on this or commentary?
So we're talking about KPIs.
Yeah.
The way that I frame up KPIs is like it's a scoreboard metric.
Yeah.
And I think that frame really makes sense. And and I think, Christine, if you would have ran this question through that filter of like, all right, what is my primary KPI? It's in most situations for like, I guess a business analyst, it's usually dollars and cents.
Yep.
So total sales. Maybe a secondary could be average deal size, which would be what at the average cost that someone gets.
Yeah,
right?
average rider fare and then average payout to a driver during surge pricing, or maybe the average like multiple of the surging or whatever. But you're very right that you can start top level, and that's actually, Christina, that's the one you missed. You missed the most important one, and that's usually the one you start with, right? So that's a really quick way for folks listening. That's a quick way to level up your answer, because Christina, I've run this kind of interview through so many people. You're not the first person who's going to miss this. And now that we say, hey, think about dollars and cents, it's like, oh yeah, of course. You know, Uber tries to make money, right? We forgot about that. But believe me, so many people forget to mention that one, which is why these kind of questions are really important to be asked. And yeah, but hey, the book has a lot of practice questions. So.
Well, okay. Well, can we kind of get under the surface a little bit? What is the intention of asking this type of question?
Sure. So it's just usually this might be one part of a bigger question, like what kinds of models or algorithms we use to do search pricing. And then it would be like, hey, what metrics should we be tracking just to make sure that your algorithm is working well. So it's a little bit more to test people's ability to not just model, but also think more like, hey, why am I modeling? Or how do I know I'm doing good? Go beyond metrics like AUC, false positive, or like, oh, I predicted something. What's the residual on it? What's the error? You know, like talk in terms of actual business terms. I think that's one reason that people ask these questions. Another is, did you do research on our product? Now, Christina, you know, we've all used Uber. We've all felt surge pricing, right? But often if you're at a smaller company, they're going to ask you something similar. And then if you're just like, oh, you know, I didn't really use the product. You see, like we're able to talk intelligently because we've felt surge pricing. But imagine there's tons of companies that will ask this same kind of case study question about their own product or own problem they're facing. Because for an interviewer, it's very easy. Like, hey, how would you think about this problem? What metrics would you track? Except Uber search pricing is easy. But yeah, believe me, there's people who mess up because they didn't do company research. So that's another thing that they're looking for is like, do you actually understand what we do as a business, what we're optimizing for? Because Uber, it's easy, money and driver wait times and things like that. But if I switched up the problem a little slightly to Facebook ads, and you told me you've been a marketing analyst, and I try to ask you a similar question on Facebook ads, and you don't use words like return on ad spend, or you don't talk about click-through rates, then I start being like, how much of a marketing analyst are you? Or like, hey, maybe you're just a general analyst, but I don't think you really know the advertising and marketing space, so I don't think you're going to be a good marketing analytics person at our firm if you can't frame it like that. So these are some of the more meta reasons of why people ask this kind of questions.
Well, something that I wanted to kind of unpack a little bit is, did you explicitly say, or was this just implied, this concept of goodwill?
I totally didn't mention it, and that would have gotten you really good bonus points. I sort of mentioned it with I mentioned the negative case, which is bad will of like, damn it, why is Uber surging? But you're definitely right. Flipped around, the goodwill aspect's like, wow, I can't catch a cab, but at least I can catch an Uber. Sure, it's surging, but I can't get a cab or I can't do nothing out here. And that's actually what happened in the early days of Uber. Why they got market share was like, you know, when it rains in New York City, you can't catch a cab, but you could catch an Uber. Sure, it'd be surging up, but you could actually still catch it though. So you're right. I think that I almost, if I understood the goodwill part, like it's almost the flip side of like, hey, like.
Well, because the way that I would frame it as a business analyst is like we've got the market cornered, and we can charge them a premium during peak hours because there's no option. And it's like, how far can we take that until their goodwill runs out and they delete the app?
Yeah. So we kind of mentioned that, right? Because with the net promoter score and looking at retention, both on the driver side and customer side, you want to make more money. But you can't forget that if you charge too much, it'll look like, wow, we're making a killing this week. And then they just stop riding Uber the next week because they're like, yeah, I'll only use Uber because it's like 10x expensive. I'll only use it as an emergency, right? So that's where the retention part matters.
Right.
Too.
Like what is the threshold where people are going to feel taken advantage of?
Yep. Yeah. So yeah, those are all really good conversations. That's the other fun part, right? Like it's just like how creative are you as a thinker, right? You just have this kind of open-ended question. And usually I'd pose that to you and I'd be working at Uber. So I have this internal context and I'd be knowing even more edge cases and I'd say, well, have you ever thought about goodwill or have you ever thought about customer satisfaction? Like, have you heard of this concept? And, you know, there's some people who have never even heard of the term net promoter score, NPS. And then other people are like, oh yeah, NPS for sure. And then tell them a lot of details around how they've tracked NPS and how measuring NPS is so hard because it takes weeks later and you don't know what to attribute it to. And then, you know, suddenly that's its own conversation we could have around attribution and lagging metrics. That's a level of conversation that is deeper than what someone else who's, you know, fresh to industry might know. You know?
See, I'm geeking out on the business side of this of like, all right, now we're talking about pricing.
Yeah.
All right, well, you know, if I sell a course for $100 and another for $1, you're just going to assume the $100 course is more valuable.
Yeah.
But that's because it's a superior good. The way that Uber works, it doesn't work that way. A cab ride's a cab ride. It's a commodity.
Yeah.
So
and another thing could be like network effects, right? Because then there's this issue of like, hey, man, markets don't work in isolation and they're competing against Lyft, right? Look at Lyft, like, you know, Uber is always tracking Lyft. Maybe you could have seen like, hey, is Lyft surging too? Because one way to know, and I mean, it's kind of stupid to say this, but it's pretty true. It's like one way to know is Uber surge pricing good is it in line with Lyft? And sure, maybe Lyft is not doing things perfectly, but they can realize like, yo, if our prices are if we're surging 10x harder than Lyft, did we make a mistake? Is our algorithm okay, or is there? What's the reason this is happening? You know what I mean? So they're definitely in their benchmarking looking at Lyft rates in every geo every 20 minutes. For every like 2 square miles, they're doing that every 20 minutes for the whole every market they serve, and they're logging that. And they're
hotels do the same thing. Like I was talking to a hotel manager or owner in Greensboro, and she was saying like, yeah, there's growth in Greensboro, and there's like 3 or 4 new hotels opening up, and that's fantastic because now I get a better read on, you know, how strictly can we follow our seasonality? Like, you know, I mean, if it's holiday season and we're in a tourist town, then yeah, we're gonna go up. But like, can we go up a day earlier or a day later? Like, but I'm geeking out on the business side of things.
No, and that's the beauty of these questions. It's like, oh, well, you know what? This reminds me a lot of this pricing analytics project I did last month. And then we'll talk about that for a little bit. And I'll leave the interview thinking like, oh, this person's not just done a random Kaggle competition. They've actually faced real business problems, you know? So yeah, that's the point of these interviews.
That's also a very strong conversational hack. People breaking down very complex concepts into, well, this is kind of like this. Then they can it's you're kind of flexing like, okay, if I work with you, if you hire me, you're going to understand, like, we're going to be able to communicate and we're going to get through this to where like, if it's a major hassle to communicate with you.
Yeah. No, definitely. I'll be honest. I flex it that way where it's like, oh, this reminds me of something I worked on at Facebook. Your ears perfect.
Right.
Oh, you did this at Facebook. I'm a small business. I guess we should trust this guy. He's seen this problem at scale of pricing analytics. I guess he can probably do that here because you better believe, like, you know, Facebook has some really interesting pricing problems as well. And if you're talking to Uber search pricing, you can relate it back to a problem you solved at Facebook. They're like, oh, we're all ears, right? And the best answer is the guy you're interviewing from Lyft talks about their search pricing. But, you know, you don't have, I mean, that's lucky, but demand forecasting, surging, like people at FedEx are solving that. People at Amazon, like everyone around everywhere has some notion of surging and supply and demand imbalances that are supposed to be fixed, right? So anytime you're able to relate that, especially if you can name drop it, but even if there's no name drop, even if you don't work at Facebook or Google, just the fact that you've seen this kind of problem before already tells me like, this guy has actually done something. So, you know, I mean, my hack is to name drop the company too, and that gives like a little bit of clout. But even if you didn't do that, it's totally fine. Just that you've seen this problem before. And whether even if that was your capstone, you know, even if it was your capstone project, like, oh yeah, this reminds me of, I don't know. I don't know how to relate to your advertising one, but I'm sure there's anytime there's dollars and cents involved and a lot of participants and decisions to be made, there's always a way to relate it back to something you've done. Gotcha. And that's another advice where I talk about in the book. Chapter 2 is all about building kick-ass portfolio projects. It's like, this is why we build projects, right? Because even if you're a new grad or in school and you haven't had too much formal experience, if you're able to relate it back to like, this reminds me of a Capstone project, or you know what, for the side, for fun, I was scraping like airline data. It's all available to make my own travel aggregator. And, I noticed that there was a surge in pricing as well. And, something like that. There's ways to relate these kind of stories. And the trick is just to do more things. You can't plan for these things, but just do more shit and build more projects, which is another advice I give in the book.
Do you just want to get to another question, or do you want to hop over to speaking in portfolios?
We talk about something else. I think these are the two main questions I wanted to talk about. One technical one with the stats and one case one here. And so this is mainly it. But we can talk about something else, portfolio projects, if that's us. Yes.
Here we go. So this is, for those of you who are, Nick fans and brand new to the podcast, we preach Tableau Public as like, if you are looking for a start, like a kickstart to a portfolio, Tableau Public is free. And they actually have their own server. So you can publish this. You can do your work in Tableau Public Desktop and then publish it to the server. And then I've actually had students who their managers have asked, hey, can you send me a link to your portfolio? And then they've got that covered right there. And then they ask some questions about the portfolio in an interview setting.
Yeah, definitely. It's a really, you stand out a lot by just even having some projects. So Christina, which project would you want to talk about?
Oh, it looks like she cut out.
Okay.
Sorry, it's like my dog was drinking water and I had to stop her because she's really loud. I'm trying to think. I have
a favorite.
Looked at any of these in a long time. So.
All right.
Okay.
So this one's a good one because it's also real data.
Yeah.
As well.
So for folks watching at home, right, whenever you can use real data, it shows like you've dealt with messy data, because real data is often messy. And it also tells me that, like you solved real world problems. These are not just like toy data sets you found on Kaggle. So that's pretty cool.
All right, Christina, you want to explain it?
Okay, so I created this dashboard for Tried Local First, which is a local nonprofit in Greensboro, North Carolina. They were given money to give out PPE grants during, the COVID shutdowns. A lot of local businesses in the area were really struggling. So they were giving out these grants to, whoever pretty much applied to them and was eligible for them. They were going and giving out these grants to them, and they wanted to get some data on, pretty much like, who are these businesses that we're giving the money to? How are they being affected? What do the demographics look like within those small businesses? So that hopefully, it could attract in the future, it could attract more, like donors or more, money from, government to give more of these grants out in the future. So they didn't really have a way to get information from these small businesses. So what I did was create a data collection, a way to collect data through a Google sheet that would be sent out to these businesses that they would fill out. And then once I got all the data from them, pretty much just put it into a dashboard and tried to filter it and sort it so that you could get some insights into who are the people that are receiving the grants, and where are they and why it's beneficial to them.
Gotcha. Cool. So I'm looking at the dashboard, and I guess I feel like that was a really long-winded way to say they gave out some of these PPE, and you were curious on who actually received the PPE and like what kinds of companies, industries, and where were they located, the recipients of the thing. Right?
Well, I think, Christina, you were getting at the way that I framed it up to you of like, what is the game that nonprofits play?
Right.
Like they have to show impact on things that funders care about. So, for example, one of them is women-owned businesses. There's a big push in Greensboro to help support locally owned women-owned businesses. So what we did was we created I thought it was going to be interactive. So this one's just static, but we created a dashboard that this local nonprofit could show to their funders to get more funding. So that's kind of the scoreboard metric is funding.
Right, so right. I think framed that way, that starts to make a little bit more sense to me. Because I usually I should almost see in that text almost like a question like, hey, like who actually got their grants? And like I need a motivating question because otherwise I don't understand. I'm looking at a bunch of stuff, but what is this? What's the question we're trying to solve, right? So that I think that part was lost. And it's a cool dashboard. I like that you use the logos of the different companies. I like the colors. I think they kind of match to Tribe Local. I feel like that green is sampled from there. If not, then maybe
I was gonna say it looks pretty polished. I would say yeah.
And I don't think I've seen that kind of Google Map type looking thing. I mean, I haven't used too much Tableau, so I haven't really seen the Google Map looking thing. So that's cool. But yeah, I mean, it's cool that you have an interactive thing. I wish. I mean, do you have any really cool insight from this that you want to call out, or anything you want to call attention to? And it's okay if it's not.
I can't really think of anything.
So unfortunately, I don't think this worked. So I was actually on their board for 2 years. And I think that the hope was we're going to build out this visualization and show it to all the funding groups in Greensboro. And I think that unfortunately, it did not increase funding. But I would say, okay, so we lost the game, but we won in that like we executed on something the executive director had envisioned. So like we built what you could say is we constructed a tool or a lever to get more funding. And you don't have to say that it failed.
No, I understand that part, and I think that's okay. And I think that's part of the story, and that's fine if it didn't work out. I meant more to say like, oh, and you know what? I found out, weirdly enough, that women-owned businesses only got 10% of the funding, even though that this was supposed to be 90%. So what happened there? I don't know, but we brought a light to it. Something to call out like, wow, you visualized something, you found something pretty interesting. Even if it's a little bit more gimmicky or like cool, like, oh, did you know? Like, I don't know. So I'll give you an example. Someone analyzed grocery store orders from Instacart to see like what are people looking at, and they just looked at what's being bought more, Coke or Pepsi. Now, is this a groundbreaking question? Not really. But hey, it was interesting. And they just have a Coke versus Pepsi chart based on 300,000 real orders from Instacart. I was like, oh, that's kind of cool. I didn't realize, Coke is selling better than Pepsi. And the Pepsi, diet versions are doing pretty good, though. I had no idea. So something like that where it's just a little bit more like, like I'm looking at this, but it's like, okay, what's cool about it, right? So that Instacart thing, it's sort of like, sure, that's not a groundbreaking, like, wow, we're saving the business a bunch of money, but it's just like, oh, cool, Coke versus Pepsi. I can get behind that. Anyone can get behind that as an interesting question that you might not know the answer to.
Gotcha. So let me pull that off. How do you think through, because I actually watched an interview with you and you're talking about building a portfolio that you are passionate about or like is packaged up in something you're passionate about, and then the halo effect. About like they just think you're an interesting, charismatic person.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you're talking and doing about things that energize you as opposed to like drain your energy.
Yeah. So I can talk a little bit more about that because I think, we shout out some key words. So I think the halo effect in psychology is where, if someone is more attractive, they ascribe better traits like they're more trustworthy or they earn more money and they're probably nicer and have better morals just because they look better. And that's called the halo effect. That's just what happens. So another halo effect in interviewing is, hey, if you're just more passionate about the stuff you talk about, you're seen as more passionate about data analytics and the company and the job at hand, and you're probably going to show up to work because you actually give a damn. And just being passionate about anything leads you to be seen that way. even if you're talking about how you're passionate about your dog or hip hop music, you know?
Right.
But here's the trick. The trick is wrap your passion, your real passion. Because anyways, I don't have to fake passion for hip hop music. I just love it. Christina, you don't have to fake passion for your dog. You love your dog, right? So it's like if you could make a project that looked at dog analytics, like you looked at 10,000 breeds of dogs on Kaggle, and you guys might be joking, what the hell is dog analytics? But go on Kaggle. I'm sure there's data set after data set about dogs and what they eat and what they do and like animal rescue. There's a way for you to tell a story about how you're an animal lover, and for fun you analyzed 10,000 records of dogs and how they were being adopted, and you figured out what kinds of dogs are more likely to be adopted than others, and you can actually predict the adoption rate of a dog given their breed, their age, and whether they have a medical condition or not. So you can predict that. Like I just made up a project right there, right? And I don't even know if this data set exists, but I'm sure it is there. And, you know, my project was called Rapstock.io, which is just like fantasy football for hip hop artists. So, you know, people love drafting their football players and basketball players on their fantasy sports teams. I was like, yo, can we do that for music? Right? Because in hip hop, we're always saying, oh, Drake's the greatest of all time. And maybe Lil Nas X, he's just a one-hit wonder. Like he'll be gone next year. Like, you know, that's just noise. So I made a game around that, and I used Spotify data to figure out how well are these different rappers doing. And I grew that game to 2,000 monthly active users. So
that's cool.
Yeah. And now in interviews, I got to talk about like, look at how I growth hack, look at my marketing chops, look at how I use data to drive my marketing, look at the product I made, look at how I'm using Spotify data to price Travis Scott and Drake in a real-time basis. And guess what I did with this portfolio project? When it came to companies like Facebook, where I joined their growth team, I talked all about growth hacking, growth engineering, and data-driven growth, which is what I ended up doing at Facebook, helping build their product and use data to drive and increase retention and engagement. That's what I did at Facebook, and that's what I did as a sophomore in college.
Are you a fan of Naval Ravikant?
Of course, yeah, I love Naval. So
you're hitting on this concept of like permission versus permissionless.
Yeah.
You created your own job and then showed that you were effective at it and then got the job.
Exactly.
But, yeah, I mean, that's
And here's
crazy.
the thing. You might be thinking like, Nick, you got lucky. You did a growth engineering project and that got you a growth engineering job at Facebook. But here's the thing. When I interviewed at Airbnb and Uber, they also have growth teams. And I talked all about my passion for consumer product and using data to drive growth. And I sent them all the project. And then when I talked to fintech companies, I talked about the stock market aspect. And when I talked to more data-driven companies or alternative data companies or hedge funds, I talked about how I'm pricing assets through alternative data because no one's trying to price Drake through Spotify data. So I took one project, I spun it so many different ways. I sent cold emails, and the head of growth at these companies are like, yo, this person's actually doing the thing as a 19, 20-year-old. We want him on our team. But that's what they said at every company. Now, of course, I don't mean to say that I got hired everywhere, but I'm just trying to say this is how you get your foot in the door and why portfolio projects are so important. And now think about me as a person. Yeah, I'm a nerd, but I like hip hop music. And sometimes my interviews would just be talking about Drake, which I could talk about all day, you know, and it stopped being about an interview. They're like, oh yeah, we like that guy. And then I talk about how I used to be a DJ. And like, oh yeah, that guy's like going to be probably cool to work with and clearly gives a damn about music and tech and data. And like, yeah, I'm sure he can do the job. Like we used his website, you know, and I had interviewers log into my website. Now, I mean, I got to do that because I have really good software engineering chops. But I'm trying to say, Christina, you have dashboards about soccer. If you somehow know that your interviewer likes soccer or even Coke versus Pepsi, that's something that everyone's like, hey, are you a Coke fan or Pepsi fan? You might find my Tableau dashboard of Instacart orders pretty interesting. Link here, right? So even if you're not passionate about Coke versus Pepsi, people are always, you know, they're somewhat curious about that, or they're somewhat curious about like, yo, what are the top brands of cookies being sold? Is it Oreos? Is it Milano? That's all right there. And you can link people to it. And who's going to be like, yo, I hate cookies. I don't want to look at your graphic. Like I'll click any day into your analysis of the top cookie brands being sold, right? So I'm just trying to show you how you can stand apart from other candidates because it's like you're showing, not telling me that you're a hardworking analytical person. You're just showing me your dashboard that's public. And that's the beauty of all of this. And I showed people my own project. And that's a halo effect of like, yo, this guy's actually kind of cool and they like data. And, You know, Christina, if you visualize some of these things and wrapped it up neatly, it's like, oh wow, Christina loves soccer, and look at her cool soccer analytics, and like look at what a go-getter she is. She can analyze soccer and these kind of things. Maybe she can analyze sales deals. It's not that different, to be honest.
I guess a question I have on that end would be like, okay, so lately I've been doing a lot of like, I guess, little assignments through the program that I'm in. But I feel like they're so small. Like, I don't know if like they're even like, I guess, worth like putting them on like a GitHub or like a portfolio. Because like recently we did like a Python analysis of like snap test data for dog recovery rate and like spinal injury, something like that. And so we did a lot of like Python, but it was just like a really small data set, and it was like just a couple of visualizations we got out of it. So I don't know if that's like, if I start putting a lot of small things like that, would it just kind of all get lost? And
it does get lost. So I think for learning, it's really good to do these small projects. But as you're investing in the job search, having one big project you can talk about yields way better results, because in an interview, usually they let you talk about what project you want to talk about. And they say, hey, what's your proudest project? Just like I asked you. Or what's the most interesting thing you've worked on? And, you know, having 9 different things scattered around, not so helpful. Now I know, so yeah, just where you can, do it on one project and just, you know, keep growing that project. You learn Tableau, make a visualization. You learn pandas, let's do some modeling. You did some SQL, let's run some SQL queries against that same data set and find some more insights, you know, just, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think the trick is to find a project that ties the little things together. Like, you know, if you're writing some type of a data pool, okay, well, let's find an interesting data set. And it just, it takes a lot of, creativity. I think just thinking outside of the box. Nick, I did want to push back a little bit of like, okay, so the adage is never do free work. Like, how does that kind of plug into, is this just, are you seeing this as like, kind of like how people see online courses? Like, let's do a side hustle, not worry about monetizing it? Or should you actually, now that I'm thinking about it, building something that you plan on monetizing means you're going to take it more serious. It's like there's going to be discipline there. It doesn't have to be hugely like monetarily valuable.
I think I don't know about the whole don't do free work. Like, this is all, it all starts out of passion. Like, when I was making my stock market for rappers, I didn't think I'd be a billionaire. I just was like, yo, this is going to be really cool if I can quantify whether I can bet on Drake or not and like see how he's doing in real time. So I think like, yeah, keep it small, keep it like as a passion project. I think if you can monetize it, that's cool. And if you can talk about that, that's even cooler, because then I think you're entrepreneurial. But I wouldn't push people to think about that, because once you start thinking about making money, then it's like, do people care about this? And then you start doing something boring. And then, I don't know. If you're really hurting for money, maybe, but like, just generally no, because I think we're just trying to make a really cool portfolio project, and that might not be in line with making money, right? So I almost want to like say no. Like, visualizing soccer players, I'm not sure anyone would pay you for that, but it would be something that you could do and it could be really cool.
Well, okay, I guess where the adage comes from is I've had people approach me like, hey, will you do free work for us, and then it'll be your interview? And it's like, that is a huge red flag in my opinion.
Oh yeah, I guess most of these big companies don't do that, right? Because it's like, how are you gonna help Uber without Uber's data? So they're not gonna give you their proprietary data. Yeah, so it doesn't really happen at the bigger companies.
Well, what's interesting is my neighbor is he used to be an engineer at Facebook, and he got a job at, oh man, I'm blanking on it, Adobe.
Okay.
And apparently a lot of these big companies just have open source projects.
Yeah.
So you can work on the project with the team. He worked on the team. He worked with the team that he got hired for 6 months before they officially hired him.
Yeah. I think open source is a different ballpark. But I'm talking about more for like analytics type stuff and data science. Mm-hmm. You know, maybe 1 in 1,000 companies is going to try to steal your work and be like, oh, do this analysis. Haha, joke's on you. This was actually our work. And, you know, you did our work for us. But that's like 1 in 1,000 occurrence.
Yeah. Okay. Well, actually, I totally had a question like that he couldn't answer because he's an engineer. Is that open source concept? Does that apply at all to the analytics or data? Because the major obstacle I see is that the data is private. You know.
Yeah, no, but it does. This idea of doing work in public totally does, because again, like there's all these really interesting data sets. Think about all the COVID data sets that came out and how many people made interesting projects using this data sets and different trackers. So I think it definitely applies. Yeah, and I mean, that's what we're doing with this Kaggle stuff. There's so many interesting Kaggle data sets that you can just put on GitHub and analyze and just keep doing it and show off to people that you know how to do your stuff.
Gotcha. All right. So Nita is asking, so how do you make your resume stand out? What kind of projects make it? I mean, I feel like you kind of already covered it.
Yeah, we covered it. So the kind of projects is just sort of like, this is where it's like, oh, everyone hears this whole spiel about do what you're passionate about and be creative. And then they're like, okay, cool, Nick. So tell me what I'm passionate about and tell me how, be creative for me. And I'm like, yo, I can't do that. You know, like that's the whole point. Like, I don't know what you're into. But as I mentioned, these bigger projects, and it's also sort of like this idea I want to push back on people like, well, I don't know what to do. Sort of like, look, we just made up this project around pet adoption, right? Like, think about anything in the slightest. We talk about hip hop music, and there's 1,000 things. You can analyze rap lyrics using NLP. You can do some investigations into public Spotify data and predict who's going to win a Grammy. You know, there's 1,000 projects there. So that's what I'm trying to say is like, there's no like, oh, well, a Grammy prediction project would have been better, or an NLP project is better than a prediction project. It's like, yo, if you're into NLP, go do NLP. If you want to do Viz and you want to visualize what are the top brands rappers shout out, is it, you know, what are the most what cars are shouted out the most? Some people rap about Benz, some people rap about their Lambo. You know, that's like a quick project that you could visualize. That would be pretty interesting. Like, hey, what car brands are shouted out the most? That's like a Tableau project, right? So I don't know. I don't have the answer for you, but there's a bajillion ideas that you can just spitball. It's up to you to do them.
Wait, have you heard of that subreddit called Data is Beautiful?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. So it's a great place for inspiration. Our data is beautiful. Yeah, totally.
I totally misspelled it. Data. Yeah, I was about to say, if we could just pull this up right fast. Communities and people. Oh, there it is. All right, let me share my screen. Yeah. Let's see if there's just anything interesting that's on here. I mean, we're totally going down. I mean, see, this stuff is fascinating. This is an animated map.
Right. And it's
public. This is exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. This data is here in the US. You could have just made this for Virginia and you're applying to a job in Virginia. I'm like, yo, this is kind of cool.
Right. So like, right. I guess, Nita, it's a framing issue of like, there is no right project. It's like, just figure out where you can get some momentum. And I mean, yeah, actually I'm kind of glad that we just went and pulled this up.
Look at this percentage of baby names that begin with each letter of the alphabet. Like, this is not deep learning. This is just straight up. What's the first letter, right? And it's still cool. Look at that. 8 points. You know, that's what I'm trying to say. The bar is sort of low, which is why it's like, I can't be creative for you. If the bar is that low, that even baby names is interesting. It's like, cool.
This is another interesting one. Number of soccer fields per 1,000 inhabitants in Europe. I mean, yeah. So just go. I guess it's self-reflection. Just figure out like, what are you interested in?
Yep.
Find data related to that and just start analyzing it. Yeah, it doesn't have to be super, super deep learning. Cool.
All
right, let me pull her question out. I feel like there were other questions that came up, but we kind of tackled them.
Yeah.
Using just going through the different projects. Oh wait, here we go. Melina's asking, how do you answer a technical question that you? Okay, I like this.
Yeah.
Because I think, Christina, we didn't prep you on tell us about the Capstone Project. Like, that came organically, and then Kelly actually grilled you a little bit in the chat, saying, "Watch the ums, watch the verbal fillers."
Yeah, my ums are a work in progress.
It happens. It's fine. Wow, I just said right there. Damn it! Now I'm self-conscious too.
Hey, now you're in your head.
And now I want to say a certain filter. Okay. Partial credit. How do you answer a technical question in an interview that you're not familiar with? Just be upfront. Hey, I don't know the answer to this, but here's how it starts. Here's what I'd look up. Or, hey, I don't know this. This part's confusing, but I think it sounds a lot like this. These are all different ways of getting partial credit. These things are like conversational. So it's okay. So same way SQL. They can ask you a really big complex SQL query. And you say, look, I don't know how to do this window function part, but I know we need to join this table with this table. So let me write the join right here. I also don't know how to do this like rolling average, but let me at least filter out this with this where query, you know? That's how you start getting closer and closer. And then at least the interviewer is like, okay, cool. Maybe you didn't know how to do a rolling average, or you didn't know this thing about a window function, but you at least know how to join. And that's, that's a foundational concept that still people can mess up on, right? So that's your approach to answering these technical questions, even if you don't have the exact answer.
Well, you mentioned that you don't need as much machine learning as most people think. How much SQL should you know? Like, for example, I am SQL illiterate. I know how to find people's like SQL queries, copy them, and then like reappropriate them for my Tableau project. But I'm not that.
Is that because you're mostly using Excel, or is it because you're doing more stuff in Pandas or Dippler in R? Or
so I use what's funny is that I'm more well known as a Power BI developer. Like I've had 300,000 people take my Power BI courses. I do all my consulting work in Tableau. So I like all I need to do is like if it's a calculated column, like that's some base level SQL.
Yeah.
And I'll just go on like the R Tableau subreddit and figure out like, okay, this is similar to what I want, and then use the syntax. But
yeah, it's a really common screen. You definitely want to know your SQL for data science and data analytics jobs, especially at these big companies. It's almost table stakes. So especially data science, a company like Facebook or Google, it's table stakes. You're going to ask you a SQL question, and you should probably get it exactly correct.
Okay.
It is what it is.
So you need to know advanced, like.
So
I guess it's almost like a language, right? It's like proficient in SQL.
Yeah. But now what you don't need to know is like advanced date time library type stuff. But you need your core concepts of joins, filtering with where, like, writing, partition over by, or doing nested subqueries. You should know those kinds of things.
Okay.
But they're not going to be like, some advanced string stuff that you have to look up. Do you know what I mean? Like some stuff of like lowercase this, or like, insert this, or you don't need to know, or index that. They're not going to ask you about it, but it's like, yeah, you should be able to join data effortlessly. You should be able to write subqueries. You should be able to find average, min, max without a problem.
So I'm going to do the kind of like thing right now. Are you ready?
You're what?
So I'm going to do the kind of like thing. Like, so it's kind of like learning Spanish and being able to go on a trip to Mexico and like be able to like order food at a restaurant. So the verb, like you have not necessarily like a huge vocabulary, but enough to like be conversational, and you know how to conjugate. So it's like you have functional knowledge.
Yeah.
The foundations.
But I would still say at these top companies, it is more cutthroat than that. But it's more like you need to know how to order, but they're not going to ask you to order escargot in Spanish. They're going to ask you to order a banana, but you better know banana and apple and orange and pizza and burger. Does that make sense?
Right.
So, because I don't know how to spell escargot in English, or maybe I do, but the point is like, hey, there's stuff that even the most advanced developers and analysts will have to look up. So they'll let you look that up. They're not expecting you to memorize that, but I'm trying to say like core things that are very core, they should expect you to do flawlessly, right? Which is why these companies ask these coding interview questions as well, where they ask you about like, hey, reverse this array, make every element from the back in the front, every element from the front to the back. Because no matter how much you look up stuff in programming, if you can't write a for loop or you can't manipulate an array, then you're not a good fit.
Right. Well, because it's like if you're just researching how to get started on the project, you're not working on the project.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get that. All right. Well, we have been talking for an hour and a half. This is time just flies by with you, Christina. Are your camera cut off?
It cuts off a lot. It buffers a lot if I have my camera on.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Well, any last questions for Nick? This has been fantastic. Thank you guys both for being on the live stream. This is awesome.
Yeah, this was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me, and thanks for being a good sport, Christina. This was a lot of fun grilling you, and but you did phenomenally, and it was really good to just put these concepts into practice. So thanks for having me.
Thank you for the critique.
Yeah.
Well, and everyone in the live chat, thanks for participating. I will see you guys next week. Actually, Christina. We're having Ben Knuff on.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So one of my students got a job up in DC doing contracting, and we're gonna have like a 6-month follow up of.
Awesome! I'll definitely tune in
to
see how he's doing.
Also, let me put in my little plug of everyone should check out the book, Ace the Data Science Interview, on Amazon, and then feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. I post almost daily with 67,000 followers. It's just Nick Singh on LinkedIn. I also have a newsletter. I have an Instagram. So you can find all of that, though, if you just look me up, nicksingh.com, as well as other free resources around job hunting, analytics, data science. It's all over there. Just look me up.
Gotcha. Well, I'm sure they're going to check it out because this has been phenomenal. I like just getting deep into the weeds. I think our audience just loves that.
Yeah. Cool, man.
So, all right. Well, I hope you guys have a good weekend. I'll see you.
Yeah. See ya.
Thank
Bye.
you.